The United States has just released its national security strategy. I have read the entire document. It is approximately 33 pages long. What is being laid out explicitly? Continuity of agenda. The Wolfowitz Doctrine. What is the Wolfowitz Doctrine? 1992 U.S. strategy plan calls for ensuring no rivals develop. This is what the United States has pursued as its foreign policy, regardless of who is in the White House, regardless of which party dominated Congress for decades, since the end of the Cold War. What is the Wolfowitz Doctrine? It is a doctrine that asserts that America's political and military mission in the post-Cold War era will be to ensure that no rival superpower is allowed to emerge in Western Europe, Asia, or the territory of the former Soviet Union, basically anywhere on Earth. It's all about rejecting a collective approach. They do not want any nation or bloc of nations undermining U.S. primacy worldwide. The link to this article will be in the video description below, and you can read it. Then you can read the national security strategy just published, and you tried to tell me how it differs in any shape, form, or way, except for a couple of throwaway quotes sprinkled in that everybody is cherry picking and clinging to while ignoring 99.9% of what is essentially repackaged Wolfowitz doctrine.
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo with co-host teacher and socialist Andy Lipson and socialist Kenny Cepeda. We're online at whatsappodcast.com. You can find that link to our site in the episode notes. You can also find my personal social media handle as @Eduardo. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. We have merch as well. If you fancy a shirt, you can contact us to our site at whatsleftpodcast.com. Thank you. All right. So, Andy, I will hand the torch over to you.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about the document that came out about a week ago, put out by the Trump administration, the National Security Strategy. And it's about 33 pages. And people have heard us talk about the National Defense Strategy many times. We've talked about the one in 2018, 2022, a National Defense Strategy. And I think we've even been talking about predicting a National Defense Strategy to come out in 2026, which it will come out. This is not that. This is called the National Security Strategy. The National Defense Strategy is put out by the Department of Defense. The National Security Strategy is put out by the executive branch. And in honesty, I wasn't familiar with national security strategies. In seeing this one, it made me go back to previous ones that usually come out 5 or 6 months, actually about 5 months before the National Defense Strategy, just to get a sense of what the relationship is between them. And I'll just say a cursory view is the National Security Strategy of 2017. Really, when I read it, was like, hey, we're winning the war on terror. Like, we've almost won the war on terror in that sort of way. The National Defense Strategy that came out right after that then really started talking about the war on terror is over. Now we've got to start dealing with China and Russia and get our defense ready for fighting major competitors, peer opponents kind of thing. And that was in 2018. And then in 2022 and then 2021, the National Security Strategy, in my opinion, sounded a lot like the National Defense Strategy of 2022. Like there was almost no difference. And they were very much about China, Russia. We can't allow a peer competitor to take, to eliminate the rules-based order kind of stuff, like to make it not possible for free market capitalism and democracy to flourish across the globe. These are autocratic governments and things like that. And so we had heard rumors that the newest National Defense Strategy is going to be a shift of sorts. And I think you can sort of see it here in the National Security Strategy. And so I wanted to talk about it. and maybe I can start with some comments, but I just want, like, I think the first thing I'll say is there's been a lot of people are, in fact, I had been thinking about the shift that the U.S. was making and what it indicated. Brian Berletic is a person I listen to a lot. He definitely looks at this document, and I think he's largely true, as very much a continuity of agenda. Like, the words are changed, but the U.S. is still looking to control the globe, as opposed to people who've interpreted it as the U.S. retreating to its hemisphere, maybe saying we're not interested in conflicts in Europe, and we're going to let our allies sort it out in Asia a little bit, but I'll just say right now that I'll put a preview in the opener. I pretty much agree with by and large Brian Berletic's take that no, that's this thing is definitely a continuation of the U.S. trying to control the entire globe, and I think one of the difficulties in it, and I think Kenny, if you read it, and Eduardo, if you read it, is honestly, there's so many lies embedded into this document. It's very hard to know what to take seriously and what not. So, like, I'll just take one. One of my favorite ones is when they're talking about, let's see, the regions, just prior to the U.S. talking about what it's going to do about the Western Hemisphere, North, South America, Asia, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. They call the regions. They had this line. Let's see. I mean, there's a million of these kinds of lines in there. In addition to, like, just saying Trump is the peace candidate. So, but whatever. It said to focus and prioritize is to choose, to acknowledge that not everything matters equally to everyone. It is not to assert that any people's region or country are somehow intrinsically unimportant. Then they go on to say, the United States is by every measure the most generous nation in history, yet we cannot afford to be equally attentive to every region and every problem in the world. And, like, the notion that the U.S. has been going around the globe dispensing lollipops around the globe, it's like, it's just so crazy. I mean, I guess that's their view. That isn't their view. They know that's a lie. So every page has so many different built-in contradictions in it. And one has to choose to make choices about what to take seriously about what they're saying and what to say, okay, that's just bullshit, which is, again, reading tea leaves. This is a public document. This is not some hidden document. This is clearly something meant to be put in people's face and to make them feel a certain way or think a certain thing. So the question is, given that this thing is a pack of lies, what in it is true, and what in it reveals something meaningful? And so I'll start there and then see what other people have to say, and then I'll tell you what I think about like what do I think is meaningful in this document.
I I actually started laughing with the very first like the introduction, where the president supposedly writes, that I'm sure someone wrote it for him. He signed off on it. And then, like, the introduction of the actual, what is America? Where is American strategy? The point is that at first I didn't take it serious. I was laughing because, just like you, obviously I have to ask myself, who is this written for, right? Like, it's like you said, it's a public facing document. It's not an internal memo. It's not, um, obviously there is information that we don't get privy to. And so what are they trying to achieve with this document, right? Like, I just like you, I'm not in the habit of reading these types of documents. Um, but it was entertaining, and based on what I consider some of the facts happening in the world, that's how I'm able to decipher some of the things that might be true in this, right? Like, today is December what? Sorry,
11.
11th, and like yesterday, the U.S. Took over a tanker, an oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela. So that tells me something, right? And then turns out that they're having other similar incidents happening in the same situation, where, like, on the behalf of the U.S., like Greece took over some tankers, right? Like there's some other energy situation happening there, and that's something that I'm paying attention to, right? Because there is a play to be made in Africa when it comes to energy, and I think energy is central. I still think Venezuela is central to like achieving the next steps to get war ready. Um, and so this is what informs my deciphering of the ridiculousness of this document. Um, because yes, it's part of the reality TV that we're all being shown, and so I guess that's my first thoughts, that I laughed at the very beginning.
I mean, I think there are three things that I had a reaction to. Again, I'm also not very versed in this type of language, so I think the three areas that I paid attention to were around the economic security and the militarization, the competitive nature with China and Russia, and as well as immigration, how much it still keeps coming up.
Yep.
So I was talking to a family member that is a Trump supporter, came to visit here in Mexico, and she's a U.S. American citizen, and she voted for Trump, and I keep coming across more people that are opening up to me, whether online or in person, that they supported Trump, they voted for Trump. And when I asked them what was their reason for it, so they say, in this case, with this weekend conversation that I had with my family member, she doesn't want to disclose. She said it was because she wanted to put America first. She thought it was unfair how there was a lot of money going into other for services or welfare for folks or for immigrants, and not for people that were already suffering. And I was thinking to myself, well, then what do you make of $40 million being sent to Argentina? What do you make of the funding of the Ukrainian war?
Mm-hmm.
What do you make of money funneling into the military so that we can bomb small boats? What do you make of the competitive nature with China and their meetings? And what do you make of, the rises? Like right now, the economy is not that good. I mean, it was at one point. I think there was something about some months ago where the economy was at some level. All right. And I look at that from just, I was thinking about that as I was looking it over this week, and all I see is the investment in trying to have more security, but for different reasons. It isn't to take care of the people who voted for Trump. It's to take care of security vulnerabilities and to create national strength that will compete with other competitive powers, such as what? If I look clearly, it says here that the NSS says the U.S. must have a strong industrial base. This is all defense production, military modernization, advanced manufacturing, high-tech innovation. I don't see how this will help people like the person I was speaking to over the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
The priorities also include what? Aerospace and defense industry, shipbuilding, AI, quantum, advanced computing, robotics and automation, rare earth mining and processing. I mean, I guess some of it could filter down to the people. Energy independence, oil, gas, nuclear, renewables. It goes on. These are stuff from that document. And why is this? Well, because the U.S. cannot rely on foreign manufacturers for critical defense components. I mean, it's all about the chess game that is being played at the global stage. I was talking to my partner today, and we were discussing, and I said, I understand why people voted. I mean, I understand people want hope. I want to believe. I want to feel that emotion during the election season, and then Kamala Harris, even though I know you're right? But people's desire, people's desire. So I understand people's desire to want to believe. But everything that the economic strategy that I'm reading has nothing to do with people. I mean, if we're going to look at the economic side of this, because that's what I was thinking, I'll look away from the immigration part. I'll go back to it. Let's look at the economic side, I don't see how that's going to directly support the people that that voted for Trump. Anyhow, that's my one thing. And then the other part that I was looking at was, well, anyone can make comments if you want to regarding that side, and then I can continue.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kenny.
Just very quick, like the pro-American section is like 2 sentences. Pro-American workers section.
Yeah.
It's like 2 sentences. And so, yeah, like to support what you're saying.
Yeah, and you will, if you go in the document, you can see something that says we're going to defend American workers. We're not going to do like what they said. We're going to merit-based job things, but if immigrants come in who are more qualified, we're not going to let those people take U.S. jobs and that kind of stuff. Again, a mix of just deceit and wishful thinking. Those kinds of things are in there, but many people have not talked about how immigration comes up in this document, and I do think we need to talk about it because I think what they're saying about immigration, there's parts of it that I feel are very real, and we'll get to those. But like you, Eduardo, the overall theme of this document is the same as all the other documents. How can the U.S. preserve its control over the globe? It explicitly says the U.S. made a mistake in trying to control the globe, but this document is about controlling the globe. But I do think in the way it talks about it, to me, does express the difficulties the U.S. has had since 2018 and 2022, and now up to now, in achieving it in the way that they were trying to achieve controlling the globe, which was the U.S. being the leader of the rule-based order, and everyone kind of, its allies kind of coming in behind it. I think the U.S. believed that it was going to be able to control the globe and rule the globe largely with itself in the front. And it was going to do that by bringing the war and bringing the difficulties to its competitors. We're going to use Taiwan to make things difficult for China. We're going to use Ukraine to make things difficult for Russia. But we're going to bring the fight to them, if you will, and we're going to do it in the name of democracy. And if this document says, "Hey, we're not going to talk about democracy anymore," of course they are. That's why they're going after Venezuela. They're going after Venezuela because of democracy and narco-terrorism and blah blah blah. But now they're saying they're not going to talk about democracy anymore, so that's off the table. But what I think is interesting is the new wrinkle here is the shift towards the Western Hemisphere. And many people have thought of it, and it's called the Monroe Doctrine, or the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Hold on. And the Monroe Doctrine was basically a statement that the U.S. will see South America as its kind of territory of interest, and no European powers is able to, which had been historically the powers that were able to intervene in that region. We're not going to let you do that any longer. And there's been a large, the Monroe Doctrine has a large history, but that's been the core basis of it, which is the U.S. basically saying this is our ground to work on and control, and any European power that comes in and tries to control it, we'll see that as going against our interests and even possibly as something hostile. I've been trying to think what the Trump corollary means. For sure, it means they're not talking about just Europe anymore. Now they're talking about Russia and China. And so it's no longer the European powers intervening. But I also think it might mean something about the shipping lanes around there, and really talking about controlling the maritime stuff around South America as well. So that's as close, because they don't really spell out, in my opinion, what do they mean by the Trump corollary. But to me, what's new in the using the Monroe Doctrine is, and even though they don't really talk about Russia and China as much as they did in the previous documents, it's clear that when they talk about non-hemispheric competitors have made major inroads into our hemisphere, both to disadvantage us economically in the present and in ways that may harm us strategically in the future. So, as me and Kenny have talked about before, when we think about Venezuela and U.S. going into Venezuela, we have thought about it more in geopolitical terms than resource terms. Not that resources aren't important, and I still believe that. I do believe the U.S. has during this time in which it thought it was going to be taking the fight to its opponents, has actually had a difficult time in Ukraine, has not been able to do anything really with Taiwan and make trouble for China in the way I think they wanted to, and has in fact found that during that time, its own backyard has been penetrated economically, and in some cases, possibly militarily, with Russia and China making inroads into their backyard. And so I actually, again, say, like, I've largely said, yes, the U.S. is the dominant empire on the globe, but it has been in decline. And I see this document as sort of cementing that, in saying that it now has to retreat. It now has to retreat a bit to actually clean up its own house down here, because its opponents are right in their own backyard, building proxies right on their border. And secondarily, they're no longer talking about leading Europe or leading Asia. They're actually talking about taking a step back and then trying to push in Asia. It would be pushing Japan, Australia, South Korea. They're imply that they can get India to do something. I don't see how they think they're going to do that, but those are the ones they mentioned, not India as much. But those powers need to take on more, like, military, like, do that same thing that Europe is trying to do: raise their GDPs, the percentage of GDP that goes to investing in the military, and take more direct efforts in their own defense and in maintaining security in the Indo-Pacific, meaning how to keep China in check militarily. The United States is saying, look, we're going to be part of all that. Like, we're going to be deep in that. And in fact, they're expecting those allies and other islands on that region to allow the U.S. to put more bases in those regions. But they are also expecting, or kind of saying, we're going to direct it, but it's going to be more of your blood and more of your treasure, essentially. That's what they're saying. And that's true both in the Indo-Pacific, and it's true in Europe. Like, this whole thing that U.S. is abandoning Europe and making fun of Europe and things like that. That, to me, that is just theater. They are basically letting the European ruling class give them exactly what they need to say to its own people: the U.S. is not going to defend us anymore. We can't rely on the United States, so we have to defend ourselves. And it's clear that this document is very much in line with when Pete Hegseth went down, and Brian Berletic talks about this all the time. When Pete Hegseth talked to the Europeans and said, "We want a division of labor. You've got to do the major lifting here in Ukraine. We need to emphasize our work." And at that time, they were talking about emphasize our work in Asia. Now I think they're talking about emphasizing the work in recontrolling and regaining, really pushing out Russia and China influence out of the southern hemisphere. So to me, I do see very much a weakened empire as a result of this. Like, it really suggests that. But at the same time, what you're seeing the U.S. have to do is, again, expand the territory of expand the breadth of the conflict. The conflict now is extending down to South America. The conflict must now involve South Korea and Japan and Australia. It must involve almost all of Europe, everybody rearming and building up their arms in order to take on Russia and China. And the stuff that's going on right now that Kenny's talking about, like Black Sea fleets being attacked in Russia, like the energy shipping that's being attacked in Russia, the stuff like you're mentioning in Venezuela, all of those really are precursors to the next phase of the global war the U.S. plans to enact on both Russia and China. I think they thought they were going to be able to weaken Russia more with Ukraine. Russia has not been weakened by Ukraine. I believe they have been strengthened. Europe has been weakened. The United States has been weakened materially in that region in relationship to a rising Russia, both militarily and economically. So I think they're having to retreat to almost a maritime strategy that they're planning on using to just China. But in my opinion, there's no doubt about this document. It is a war-making document, and that's why all the things Eduardo said about, like, building industry, and also becoming self-sufficient for all the industries that it was going to build, defense industry and both defense manufacturing and non-defense manufacturing, trying to be more self-sufficient, not allowing its competitors to cut it off, but putting itself in a position to cut its own competitors off. That's what they're hoping to do. That's what this document is about. But those are the things I see: more global control, more spread of the war, as the empire itself is in decline. That's what I see in this.
So I just want to comment on this notion of retreat, right? Like I don't necessarily. I mean, obviously they play failed, right? Like they thought they could just project power, as the in the old arrangement, right? Like in that, um, and so there was some failure, right? And like that's part of war, right? Like, and war is being fought. The war has already started, right? Like, it's not direct confrontation, but there is economic war that is obviously happening, right? There is war in other domains, right? There's a strategic, there's soft power being, pressed in different areas of the world, and so again, like I don't see the retreating to Latin America. It's an act of aggression in the sense of preparing for aggression, because I see Latin America as a strategic area, right? They talk about supply chains. They're gonna have to secure the supply chains that exist and develop some of those supply chains, right? Like they're doing in Australia and like with South Africa, I believe, or um, and they're also the U.S. is also playing in like in the Rwanda, DRC, area where there's also a mineral situation happening. So there is a lot of stuff going on in relation to this. But Latin America is central, right? And that's not only for me in the sense of not allowing China, right, like to come in, but also it's getting its minions in order, and kind of because I see like the two options presented in Latin America right now are basically the Salvadorian Bukele, right, like the modern dictator, or the Venezuelan will fucking lock you out of, because what's happening, there's essentially a blockade happening in Venezuela right now, and not only are they squeezing Venezuela, but they're also squeezing Cuba in that process, and probably Nicaragua, because Nicaragua has like an energy dependence on Venezuela, and so they are tightening the leash and seeing who's going to play what, and also I see uh, a warning to countries like Brazil, right, who want to play in the big leagues. Brazil has 200 million people. Their economy has grown. They have their own payment system. They're part of the BRICS block. So it's also a warning to them. So it's basically like trying to see in its own backyard, what kind of, like the analogy that your mom used, right, in its garden, what insects do we have to kill, and what insects are going to be useful for our garden. And so I think that's what they have to do in order to be able to fight, and project abroad, and to see what areas are going to be the vulnerability. And so in that sense, absolutely, right? This document reflects that, right? Like that they're prioritizing moving back here. That's what we're seeing in the events happening in Latin America, right? Like the Argentina thing is at the economic theater, right? Like the Venezuela is the military theater. Uh, the Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, they released the fucking president that was accused of narco traffic, right? Like, and he was convicted for narco traffic. He was pardoned by Trump, and these might seem ridiculous in the surface, but these are all plays to again get shit organized in the Americas. There is a landmass greatly distanced from these powers. China, right? Like in Russia, they're across the Pacific, and the Pacific is massive, right? And so there is a degree of um, difficulty for China and Russia to exert any real hard power, right? Like the only kind of theater that they can play here is really mostly soft power, and so I see that it's mostly about getting each country in line and to see what they have to do, and to secure, like, the lithium, the minerals, the oil, the other supplies, like that they might need for effecting war, on a global level. And but also, uh, something that I think is very much present on this, and I sort of dismiss at first, is that they are absolutely pandering to the MAGA base on this document. Like they're hitting um, those punchlines, right? Like immigration, national security. Like we don't want to overextend. All administrations have made a mistake. We want America first. We want to defend meritocracy. So a lot of it is kind of like catering to that uh, group of people who still believe in the American mythology, right? Of like that this should work for us. That it once worked for us, and that as long as we have someone who cares in office, we're gonna be willing to die, because there is a real problem of people willing to go and die for this country at this moment, right? Even there is a significant portion of the MAGA base who are questioning that, right? Like even the likes of Candace Owens, she's straight up questioning this going into the military, for the U.S., questioning the structure of power itself. And this is something that I think MLK died for, right? I'm not saying that Candace is in that level, but it is dangerous, right? When you're literally telling people who are patriots, who are willing to die for the flag, don't go fight for this, the powerful right now, because they're not about us. So I think there is a recognition that there is some weakness in its domestic effort, to corral that effort that will be needed, right? Because like Eduardo pointed out, there is economic trouble. Shit is getting hard, for a lot of people, and people are starting to look different ways, right? Like you've mentioned the Marjorie Taylor Greene kind of breakoffs to kind of corral people back into the system, right? And so I think that there is a significant portion of this that is dedicated to that, to pandering to that mythology that is ridiculous if you're someone like me that analyzes that as bullshit, right? But they spend a significant amount of time on hitting those points, and immigration is one of those points, right? Like, and then we'll go into that maybe.
Yeah, and I want to save the immigration thing because you said that the immigration stuff was like red meat to MAGA, and I don't think it is in this document. I think there's real stuff said here that says they got something in mind, and plus it's red meat. But I want to stick with the geopolitical thing, and then we'll come back to the immigration, because I think they're connected, and I do think they're connected very much to a U.S. ruling class that's hell bent on control abroad and control at home. But this line, when they talk about the new Monroe Doctrine Trump corollary, they write, the United States must be preeminent in the Western Hemisphere as a condition of our security and prosperity, a condition that allows us to assert ourselves confidently where and when we need in the region. The term of our alliances and the terms upon which we provide any kind of aid must be contingent on winding down adversarial outside influence, from control of military installations, ports, and key infrastructure to the purchase of strategic assets broadly defined. This kind of statement was not in the defense strategies or the security strategies for the last 8 years. They were not worried about the Western Hemisphere. Something has happened in the Western Hemisphere during all that time when they were trying to make a mess in Russia's backyard and in China's backyard. A mess was being made in their backyard, and they're recognizing that now. And so they have to come back and pull and do something about it, because they're like, I do think there's something going on here that is a shift from what the way the U.S. perceives its abilities to project its might, and the fact that it's now pretty much saying that our might is largely going to be one of coordinating our allies as they fight in Europe and fight in the Indo-Pacific, which is that's a tough road to go when you're going against up and coming empires. So, but regardless, so I do think that this document is like, they never put up the idea that the South America was up for grabs, and now it seems like they think it is. And so I do think that to me, putting this at the very front is a meaningful thing because it's never been talked about in any previous strategies, defense strategy or security strategy. So I want to say that, and then we'll come back to the immigration because I want to talk about that.
And again, I just want to emphasize that the way I see it is that uh, I don't see it much as like in a real threat, like from like Russia or China, because they do have projects, but like I know, for example, Project Nicaragua that was never completed of a refinery, because they also, the U.S. managed to mess that up, the whole uh, coalition that Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba, they all had, like that by and large has like collapse. And so again, the way I see that is as a reason to justify, the intervention that they're going to need to do in order to secure the supply chains that they will need to project forward. Like because I personally don't think there's a real threat in Latin America, of like foreign interference of sorts. Of course, they'll because it's kind of over. Like everyone in Latin America is very close or in large. Even like for example, Mexico, Morena, like capitalism with a conscience. Like I personally don't see a real threat from adversaries abroad. Um, I see more of an emphasis on that to justify the actions they're going to have to take.
Just to say, one of the major things, though, is the United States is not getting direct Chinese exports any longer. Much of the stuff that's coming in to the United States from China is in Chinese companies that are building stuff in South America and other countries. So there have been inroads, and even in Venezuela, like there was talk of like Maduro's like, hey, China said they've got our back, and there was talk of like stationing Oreshniks in Venezuela. Like maybe that's all talk, but that's a very different kind of conversation than has been had before. And I mean, the U.S. is going to have to sweep Maduro out in some way, shape, or form. But if they don't do it quickly, like I do think there's a problem for them, and maybe there's just a difference there. I'll just leave it at that.
What this re-emphasizes on what we have discussed does solidify what you've said and what you've shared from Brian Berletic in the past about pushing NATO, its north, pushing NATO to be independent and to deal with that part of the world. I think is emphasized here when it says that the US wants NATO allies to spend more on their own defense and to pressure European allies to strengthen their military so that the US carries less of the load. I mean, that is nothing that revelatory. It just stamps what we've talked about in the past. It's all that I think that does for me. And going over that area, sometimes we discuss things here and I feel, oh, well, maybe it's, we're inferring here. But then there are documents like this that actually give evidence to what has been discussed, which brings it home for me. It's like, oh my goodness, this is really happening. It's like there is a strategic way of dealing with the world competitively, and definitely the US wants to make sure that the NATO is capable and not dependent on US funding to be able to have that area covered, So I think that the only thing that I was looking at, that it's like, oh, right, that so it is true. We're not just guessing here. So that just makes it evident for me.
Kenny, any last word on this? And I do want to go to the immigration stuff.
I guess, yeah. So what I hear Eduardo saying is that, well, it's like he's emphasizing this proxy thing, right? Like, because I do think more countries are getting invited into the fight, like the rumble. And that's what I see, again, in the whole Venezuela thing. because again, like, and it also touches on what you just said, that I know that there is more Chinese stuff being made, right? But there is a thing called nationalizing. That is a historical thing in Latin America. You can take shit over, right? Like if you,
Right.
especially if China cannot project military power, you know, this far, and are willing to, then they can just take these factories over and use them for whatever purposes they need,
Yep.
right? And the other thing is that Venezuela has the potential of having a high degree of economic independence. That was the threat of Chavez, right? Chavismo in the region. And so that's also part of the equation, right? Like to not allow them to have this energy independence in the region, right? Because if Venezuela like comes together with Brazil, that's a massive fucking thing, right? Like, and so again, like that's why I don't see it. There is no military threat to the US in Latin America unless the Russians and the Chinese put missiles, right? Like that can reach the US missile crisis again, right? Like, and but I mean, also they have the technology to just launch shit from their own places and reach the US, right? That is, so it's beyond the missile crisis of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and so that is a possibility. Again, I just see that um, these I at the moment I don't see this theater as being a confrontation between China and the US or the Soviets in the US more directly like Ukraine, like that, even though it's a proxy, Ukraine is more of a direct conflict. I see these of a region of like, give us your shit. It's a shakeup again. The shakeup is coming again. Give us your shit peacefully, or we're gonna fucking take you out. And now we have missiles that can destroy drug cartels, quote unquote. And we're willing to fucking use it. That's what they're waving in front of in the entire Latin American. The what is it? The silver or the bullet type of thing is the mafioso thing, and so that's why I don't. I think for me that process, I don't even see like a lot of military fights in that sense, happening in the region. Not to say that there won't be any destruction, because again, they're showing that they will fucking bomb your shit if you don't fold, peacefully, and because we don't have time for that shit. Time is of the essence right now, and so that just want to say that's what I see. Like yes, Europe, the lapdog, has to come into it because they have nowhere to land, right? Like the U.S. has them by the balls, and then the same thing with like the Philippines and the other island nations, right, or the Southeast Asia region, right? Like that is more of an area where I will see like death and like of happening of that direct conflict, and maybe Ukraine and some of those areas and some of the Middle East, right? Because Israel is the other lapdog that projects that violence that needs to be executed. I just don't see that happening in Latin America. Latin America, I see it more again a repeat of the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s of like more dictatorships taking root in order to do the beating of power.
Yeah, and before I want to go to the internal part of this document. It was interesting in the Middle East part of it. They almost didn't mention Israel at all, like maybe once. There's no way that they're down, like they're not. If you read the document, it suggested the Middle East is all good. Iran's taken care of. Hamas is taken care of. Yemen. I don't even know if they mentioned the Ansar Allah. But I don't know what to make of that. That just seemed like a lie to me. But at the face of it, it seemed like they were emphasizing Western Hemisphere, South America, Asia. Then they go to Europe. Then it's like Middle East and Africa not so important. And then the document doesn't even bother to have a conclusion. But let me see where I think we agree. I think we all agree this is a document for global war making. And it ensures that the war is going to be spread. Like more people are being invited into the war party, if you will. The party of war. And that to me is fairly clear. Like people who think that this is any indication of the U.S. retreating to a peaceful thing, or even retreating because it's weaker, it's to like, we're not going to fight so hard. No, this This is a document of the U.S. trying to do everything it can to control the entire globe, even as it says we can't control the entire globe. But I want to get to the internal part, because if it is a document of war making, then, as we've said before, then the war has to start at home, and the control has to start at home. And what I see, and I'm going to read two parts to the very opening of the what should the United States want, even before it talked about its foreign policy, which I think is going to be more in the Department of Defense. The national security strategy also has to talk about a domestic component. And this one, to me, sounded very much like, we're going to control your ideas and we're going to control your movement. And I'll read it. We want to protect, and I want you to think as you read it, because this is what I started to think about. Like, people all have been thinking of immigration only one way, like people trying to come into our country. But people should remember, during the Vietnam War, people were fleeing this country to escape the war. They were going to Canada and they were going to Mexico, and the US had to do something about that. And so you should ask yourself, if the US knows that eventually, that even as much as it tries to get Europe and other powers in Asia to bleed for them and to use treasure for them, which they will, and they will be successful in it, the US knows that eventually it's going to have to bleed itself. And that means control. So they say in this document, in the opening sections, we want to protect this country, its people, its territory, its economy, and its way of life from military attack and hostile foreign influence. Whether espionage, predatory trade practices, drug and human trafficking, destructive propaganda and influence operations, cultural subversion, or any threat to our nation. Like, in those last lines, that's just literally censorship. That is all that is. If you don't read that as anything other than the US giving itself the right to take away free speech, even though later you're going to hear about free speech in the document, then you don't know what they're writing about. Because, like, whenever they talk about getting rid of free speech, it's because it's some foreign agent bringing ideas in. So that's that first one. And then they go next. We want full control over our borders, over our immigration system, and over transportation networks through which people come into our country legally and illegally. We want a world in which migration is not merely orderly, but one in which sovereign countries work together to stop rather than facilitate destabilizing population flows, and have full control over whom they do and do not admit. Like, literally, they're laying out to you that we're going to control all your motion. I don't know if you want to hear that in terms of immigrants, but they're basically saying sovereign states get to control any, legally or illegally, they get to control how you move. So if that's true for Mexico coming here, do you not see that it's also true for you going there? And do you think that's really going to be restricted between national borders and not state boundaries when you have red, blue, blah, blah, blah? It's like, I don't think you could read any document that was more clear about saying we are going to have to control our population, its ideas more, its motion and its ideas more rigorously. And that's why it was really meaningful for me to see that there are throwaways in here, like, that are just bullshit, MAGA red meat. That is not. That is a promise of internal control. And so I just wanted to say that I found, like, people aren't talking about these sections. And I don't exactly know why, but they're the most indicative to me of how much war making the US plans on doing. Eduardo, maybe you should fire some.
Well, I mean, I think I appreciate you bringing that up, Andy. It's never been about immigration. It's about control. It's about people's ideas. I mean, I was just trying to find, like, I was just here. I mean, before I go there, I was just thinking, how is this about prevention of drugs when you are releasing Juan Orlando Hernandez, ex-president of Honduras, and you're trying to attack Maduro, which I'm not sympathizer with Maduro, by the way. I was told that several times today because I criticized Maria Corina Machado, and I posted it, and all my Venezuelan community came after me. So I'm attacked, and I have like 200 messages I have to respond to. But, you know, that's like, I keep telling them, do you not see that she's selling Venezuela? And she went to Oslo today and she said it clearly. We have always been invaded. She said it in English. She speaks perfect English, and she's part of a higher class. She's not a working class person. And she said, we've always been invaded by the Russians, by the Iranians, by such and such. And I'm like, what does that fucking mean? You just want more invasions? You know? So we've always been invaded. So your house is dirty. Might as well make it more dirtier. It's just, so I said that and people got offended. But what I want to make the connection about is it's not about drugs. It's not about immigration. We're seeing the inconsistencies. It's about control. And I'm going to lay it out. And if you don't fall in line, here's what's happening. I'm looking over Ken Klippenstein. I'm going to share this article with you all so y'all can see.
Should I
And
let you share on your screen?
yeah, please.
Hold on. Go ahead.
This is around domestic terrorism. The FBI making lists of American extremists leaked memo. Are you on Trump's naughty list? This is released from Ken Klippenstein, the 6th of December 2025. And people can go to it, so I just said it because we're not allowed to put links in the episode notes on YouTube. So here it is, folks. Again, I'll read the title. FBI making list of American extremists leaked memo reveals. And it goes into, it's a compiled list that the Attorney General Pam Bondi is ordering the FBI to create of groups, entities engaging in acts that may constitute domestic terrorism, according to a Justice Department memo published here exclusively, here with Ken Klippenstein. And I was just afraid that if you are not following the rules at the border, you might just get searched, seized, your stuff might get seized, everything that I'm doing. And not only that, if you don't fall in line, the other thing that I'm afraid of is, and I promise I connect all this to immigration, is that I just learned yesterday that even people who have, like Glenn Greenwald, who have interviewed Edward Snowden on how much the government spies on you, and I'm sure he has kept so much of his information private and has been able to create all kind of security, cybernetics on his devices, has just had a video leaked, a sexual video of him with another person, it was consensual, leaked online after he gave an interview with Tucker Carlson on Jeffrey Epstein being part of the Mossad. I mean, the day after it was leaked. How is that? Is that coincidence? And so if you'll get punished if you're part of this list where you are an extremist.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm really, so why is this important? How is this all related to immigration? It's because if you look in the document, let me pull up my other notes now. All right, so it goes on about framing irregular migration and porous borders as threats to adversaries, It makes the whole case that immigration systems enforcement are potential vectors through which adversaries could influence and infiltrate the USA, And then it goes into how it making securing the border, preventing unauthorized entry of people, contraband, and dangerous actors. Oh, this is all the scary stuff you're supposed to be afraid of. And so then they talk about the goal is to enhance vetting and screening to ensure that individuals entering the U.S. do not constitute threats to national security. What does that mean? So I went and further looked into this, and I said, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean? So we've been discussing a fair amount of this, but maybe some of this might be repetitive, but that's all right because I think every episode should discuss this because I don't know what people are doing, falling into the trap that this is our savior. So this is a clear, concrete examples for folk. This is my MAGA community that they're slowly coming out of the closet as finger biometric systems. We know that. Watch list and database checks, right? Terror screening data set, FBI criminal databases, which is Pam Bondi is asking, Interpol notices, custom immigration violation databases. So anytime you're traveling for visa arriving, you all have all these biometrics and identities checked all across these systems. And you have advanced screening algorithms to risk profiling system that flag your inconsistencies in travel history or suspicious travel patterns, and which is a big thing for me because I'm always traveling. But also the intelligence sharing between all these platforms, the FBI, the DHS, the CIA, the NSA, the DOD, Department of Defense, or Department of War now, State Department, local police fusion centers. And that could be state level hubs for intel sharing. And you'll also have international intelligence sharing. I didn't even know about this one. Five Eyes Allies. Maybe I'm behind or something, which has to do with New Zealand, Australia, Canada, England, the UK, and the USA.
Mhm.
And then there's Interpol, of course, Europol, Mexico, Canada, Central America partnerships. And it just goes on. I could go on, right? There's border inspection tools that will be enhanced, surveillance monitoring, and integration enforcement tools, and anti-smuggling countercrimes, which is not necessarily going to be for drugs, but will be wiretapping and communication intercept tools that will be used without warrants at times onto people, because it's all in the name of we're trying to keep the drugs at bay. So I guess what I'm just trying to say by this is it's not only the immigration has been such a way to allow, well, and I said this to Jake, how do you think that our free society that you wish we have, how do you want us to live a society that we're not being surveillanced? Do you imagine that under Trump, any administration, but more hands under the Trump administration, because it was dangled in front of MAGA folk that we're going to get rid of, the immigrants, the illegals, you how could you not see this? You're blind to this. And all the things I just mentioned. But that doesn't, somehow that just goes away. I don't know, somehow I don't know what he's seeing. And I said that over the weekend conversation I had with a Trump supporter. And she said that she doesn't want to be surveillance. She doesn't want her life to be tracked. She doesn't want her whole life to be on a database. But that's what the invitation is when you say, yes, I want more enforcement. Yes, and check to all the things that I've mentioned. Because apparently you don't have anything on you. You're not a terrorist. You're not a narco. You're not whatever. But all this is not designed because they're trying to prevent drugs. All this is designed because they're trying to get a clear thermometer on what the political, what the rest of us, the 90% of us are thinking. What is this whole group thinking, and how can they persuade and watch your every step and control what you see and what you don't see? So I'm concerned that that's not on people's mind. It's not on people's radar. And I was sharing this with my partner today. I said, I just don't know. You're Venezuelan, and you're allowing, not you, but like we're allowing Venezuelans to enter, for Maria Corina Machado to just on a silver platter let the USA enter, which is going to just get worse by the credit system that we have. And that's the life I'm not trying to live into, and which makes me afraid if I was to ever consider having children in the future. So all these things are kind of in my head, and I've been thinking about this all day in the car as I was in traffic by the peregrinos, by the pilgrimers. Okay, sorry.
That's okay. No, I mean, I think it's a couple. Well, when you were speaking, I was thinking of wrong thing, right? Like if you're thinking the wrong thing, right? Because a lot of the stuff that they really don't define on these documents, like extremists, terrorism, that are obviously subjective to the power that be to enforce. That's always been useful, will continue to be useful. I also is I hadn't thought of what Andy said, Lipson, the outflow, right? And so, and like again, Eduardo, you talking about borders reminded me that again, I've worked with undocumented people, a lot, refugees, and one thing is very obvious is that borders follow them, right? They might be in the country, but they might not have access to certain things, right? Like, and by and large, I feel that this whole notion of an invasion, because they do mention an invasion in here, like, they allude to that, and I think they tie immigration to an invasion, right? And this is something that some people on the left has swallowed too. That somehow there is a massive issue, right? That these people are overwhelming our systems. Fucking Bill Clinton used that shit. Obama has used that shit. You know, uh, you name it. So it's not just a MAGA thing for me. Like, it's everyone to some degree has conceded that this is something real, right? Like that the crisis that they're trying to defend us from is real, and that the state has a role to play in there. And so for one, I think it's massively overstated. you know um this whole thing about busing people to like these liberal cities and now going to those same cities and getting them out. It's a fucking like, no one's talked about that, like that really in that making that connection, that they it's more of the reality TV shit, and they're using real people to sell an idea, right? That there is a crisis, that the state has to come into your communities and fucking come in in occupation type of operations. And that also has like an effect, right, of preparing people for more of that shit. But I do want to focus on like the whole borders, right? Like we've talked about this a lot when it came to the COVID period, right? The whole of digital IDs, right? Digital passports, and you know now it's real, right? Like different countries. Mexico's pushing that shit. Biometrics is up the ass everywhere in Mexico, right? I went to Mexico City building like a couple years ago. You have to scan your face to go access the building. So it's actually even might be more advanced than here in some ways. In a lot of in other countries, Europe, right? Like the fucking Labor Party is pushing that shit, right? Digital ID. California's doing their own shit. Different states are doing their own shit. So this shit is moving forward. And again, I'm trying to not like use the moralizing thing, right, to convince people, because this is not just about refugees from countries that were fucked with, right, and they're looking to, you know, to survive, right, in a system that just fucking swallows, chews people, and throws them away, discards them when they want to. um, this is about everyone, right? Like you just mentioned that whole thing. Like if you have the wrong type of thinking, and there's a sentence in this document that feels like it's a threat to me. It says, "quote soft power," end quote, "that serves America true national interest is effective only if we believe in our country's inherent greatness and decency." So if you go against if you question the decency of this country, if you question the historical facts, right, like of this country, and then soft powers will not be used against you. You know, so then soft power loses its effectiveness. And so that's going to be the choice. I right now know people who have come to this country as refugees because they were fleeing censorship, and now they're watching what they say here, because if they leave the country, to come back. Because guess what? If you're not a citizen of the United States, now they can look into 5 years of your social media history. And if you've said something wrong, you may not be allowed in, right? That includes refugees, that includes people with like, that haven't been fully become fully citizens. You know, this might also include in near future people who have been naturalized, become citizens, going through the whole process, and suddenly no, you're not, you know, you're not believing, you don't believe in the inherent greatness and decency of this country.
Mhm.
And so it's about everyone, and it's right there. It's at the door. I don't know what the fuck to do, right? Like, other than have this discussion, because I look at it and it's everywhere, and this is why I last episode I spoke of me not trusting people in tech, really. People who have that vision of analytics and fucking data and that vision, because that's by and large people on the left who want to have a humane capitalism, a humane immigration system. What the fuck does that mean? Like, I don't know. But again, like, I agree with you, Eduardo, that they have sold us, right, that there is this massive crisis and the threat to our lives, that it's placed on the immigrants, right, that are coming over the border, and that not the motherfuckers that are wearing suits everywhere, right? Like, that is that they're coming here to take our jobs. That the reason capitalism is failing to provide, for the masses, is some fucking immigrant who crossed, all of South America to get here. And honestly, they probably deserve more to be here than West fucker who were just born here, like, because and whatever. But the point is that it is a beautiful magic trick that they've played. It's not new. It's not a new fucking trick, and it's not just the right thing. The people on the left have swallowed the shit, and beyond that, this is one more point. And I think people who have, stayed on top of the whole digital shit bullshit. Like, I already see a world where, like, country, like, well, maybe that Freudian slip is true. Places like San Francisco will monitor who the fuck is in here and why. What are you doing here? Right? And you may have a situation like the Dust Bowl, right? Like in 1930s, when, like, the economy was shit, and then the Dust Bowl happened. California considered closing its borders to people coming from the Midwest, right? Like, so there is circumstances where this can be useful to manage flows of people that is not just transnational; it's internal. It's from city to city, right? And so it's just fucking insane, crazy, and I don't know what else to say, but that it's not just a right and left issue, it's an everyone issue, because the border might be dropped on your ass because you have the wrong line of thinking.
Yep.
Amen. And for people who are, I'm not trying to get ahead of myself, Andy, here, but for some people, the great conspiracists, the people who think about the replacement theory, I just think, I keep reading and reading, trying to understand the article. It seems to be, I'm sorry, I'm going off a tangent here, but it does seem to me that much of what I read there is actually ideological rather than empirically verified, because I have been trying to understand it. And so I've been looking it over. It's on my reading list. The thing is, I think that I speak to the community that we've had, from the freedom movement to the people who've decided, like very people who are close to me, decided that they would be given the carrot to follow into the trap of voting for someone and being swept up by the election season to vote for someone, the candidate that they thought that would help them, is actually not going to help them, and everything's going to backfire. And if we don't do something now about it, and if we don't actually see it for what it is, this is not about immigration, it's about control, and it's about getting us to be on the cyber network, then that's what we're going to be. Well, that's why we're fucked, because we never learn from anything. It's like, I keep telling people from Venezuela and all these messages, which I wasn't able to see because I was at my grandmother's birthday today, that I don't think you understand Latin American history. Has anyone read Eduardo Galeano's book and talked about the U.S. meddling with the elections and U.S. meddling with the government in other countries, such as in Chile, such as in Central America? Like, when has a U.S.-backed government actually been successful for us to have a perfect sovereign nation that actually gives the people who are always the backbone of a country a better life, a better world? It didn't give anything. So I don't know why the invitation, but we don't learn from history. And we're still not learning. Even the people in, the Northern Hemisphere who think that this is the fight we have to have. It's against the legals. It's against the drugs. Careful, Andy. They're coming after you. They're going to replace you. People like Kenny and myself are coming after your life, Andy. So that's the great replacement for some people who write about that kind of stuff. Yeah. Anyhow, but we'll discuss to the people. We'll hopefully discuss that. I'm not so sure how interested the people who believe in that stuff, especially if they wrote books on it, are interested in changing on that, so-called socialists. But That's, I think, what we'll be discussing. And I think that this will always be sort of a, on the radar, because it's always on the news, and it's unfortunate. I don't want to talk about it. You want to talk about it. Not like you two, like the people want to talk about it on the other side. But you know what I mean? I just think we're just so distracted by it. This is not the issue. This is not something we should be discussing.
Well, what was the COVID crisis that we supposedly experienced in
Right, there you go, another one.
2020? What was the
Dangleton
real
comes with
COVID
us.
crisis? The COVID crisis was the fact that the state and corporation had lied to us that there was a crisis. They called it a COVID crisis. What it was a crisis of the state and the corporations looking to get over and direct wealth up and control our lives and make a digital hellscape of the world and put us into little pods. That was the COVID crisis. It was the manufacturing of a fake crisis in order for these powers to impose a real crisis. That's what the immigration crisis is. It is the manufacturing of a fake crisis, because there is no immigration crisis. Immigration isn't a problem for workers. Workers are best when they are free to move anywhere. That's true for all of us. But now that they've been able to convince left and right that there's an immigration crisis, that where they can come in and create the real crisis they want, which is the crisis of state and corporations controlling our lives, basically controlling what we say. And the thing you said about domestic extremism, that is directly connected to controlling immigration. And we're going to talk next week to Aaron Leonard, who talks about the Communist Party. There's a long history of controlling radical movements by controlling the actions of immigrants. So, here we go again. People said the narrative cracked, the COVID narrative cracked. Well, they open up a new one, and we've all fallen for it. And it is a little bit disheartening. But at the same time, people have fallen for either this Ukraine war or fallen for the idea that the U.S. is retreating. There are lots of illusions that people have fallen for, and that's partly why we get these words out and try to say, "Hey, no, this is what's going on."
I've also gone into this 9/11 hole, the whole rabbit hole, 9/11. I'm just flabbergasted. What the fuck? Who in the world? All these questions I have, and if you notice in past episodes, I hardly touched 9/11. You've mentioned 9/11. I think Kenny might have mentioned 9/11, and I stayed quiet because I didn't want to participate. I said, I can't control them. But, they'll say whatever they want to say. And here I am suddenly looking into it, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, and how it's carried over, inherited political power that has not been, reined back, that every Democrat president and Republican president has abused and used. So, it's the terrorists, it's drugs, it's immigration, it's some health scare, it's whatever it is. And we've said this before, but people buy into it. And I will say, I have bought into it. So I understand. I truly haven't. I sometimes hesitate from trying to, entertain something like that. So I get it. And that we fall victim to stuff like that. So anyhow, we'll
I'm glad you're looking at that. That's an important piece of history to go back into.
Yeah. Going back to this, though, I think that the national security strategy is different from the national defense strategy.
Yeah.
Or might
the
wording. But it does give a clear view of the administration's, the president's view. As Kenny said, someone might have ghostwrote this or ChatGPT'd it. But it really does give you a sense of what is the compass of where the direction of the U.S. state.
And I want to say something. It is believed that it was written by Eldridge Colby. That name might be familiar as a person who started the Marathon Initiative, which is one of the think tanks we had talked about. So that's, most people are saying he's the major author behind this shift. But I will say, everyone should read it, but it is still a situation where extricating truth from lie is not an easy thing to do, because there's so many lies and falsehoods embedded in it, and contradictions of we defend national sovereignty, but we're going to go ahead and nation build in certain places. It's absurd. So it even says it's not hypocritical for us to say one thing and hold our allies doing something else. We're just going to declare that not hypocritical. It's like it's hard to know what to do with a document like written like this, but we're doing our best here. And so I would say people should read this to see what they make of it, and then, like what Kenny's saying, measure what you see in the world as best you can make of what we see in the world against these words.
Just as like a funny anecdote, I've never seen Trump's signature, and I was kind of like interested. And how people read some psychological stuff into it and whatever. But I also try not to focus on him as an individual, because I think that's a very big trap that a lot of people fall into. Right, like, yeah, he's a narcissistic egomaniac and all that. Sure, yes, absolutely, but that he's not making other decisions. Absolutely,
No.
And so, but it's funny though. It's funny that he finally got his FIFA, like the International Football Association first ever peace prize. So he finally. It's and I was actually talking to my brother about this stuff, and like, just basically how everything is a fucking reality TV show. Everything is like the Truman Show, right? Like, it's just ridiculous, and it's so hard to dump all this shit on people, who sometimes, because I try, to my best to engage with my family, and they do a good job, but I know it's a lot, because I also know that we're also in a like a an ecosystem, right? That kind of self reinforces. We have some of our own shit that's probably like, that's why I like this agreement, and like I'm enjoying staying in that in this agreement, because that's something that I think I've had to learn, and so I'm grateful for the people who have comments, there are people who start conversations that I sometimes just hesitate to jump into because there's a lot going, but we do our best.
Yep.
Just to touch on disagreements, though, there was still a pending conversation that Andy opened up some episodes ago, and I really would like for us to revisit this. Is the efforts by people that try to make change, such as the people in Venezuela, is all in vain, or is it worth something? And I say that because I've just revisited that conversation with my partner, and we were in the car, and he said to me that the reason why so many people, even who have invited Maria Corina Machado's plan for U.S. intervention, is because they're exhausted and that they've come to a limit and they've want some change.
Yeah.
And anyhow, there's a split right now, and I've been thinking about this question a lot. And what does it mean how do we bring about change too? So, all right, let's end. Well, I thank you. Whose idea was this? This was yours. This was your idea. Andy, thank you so much. I didn't think I'd be interested in this. You mentioned it in the What's Left group chat, and I thought, I'm not sure. But I'd be honest. I didn't read the whole thing. Right. You delve into areas that appeal to you, and even that just gives me food for thought. And I appreciate us going into it. All right. Well, that does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes where we found this episode, or on our blog at what'stheftpodcast.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast / channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you fancy anything you've heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on Spotify, iTunes, Podcast, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. It really gives visibility to the show, and people can check us out, and it will give us a chance to also further reach other folks that would like to hear this and who are disillusioned with the state of the world. You can find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes where we found this episode. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us at our blog. Andy will always kindly be in contact with you. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host Kenny Cepeda and Andy Lipson. Check us out for next time. Thank you all for listening. Ciao, ciao.